Welcome, everybody. I hope you've had a chance to attend the other two sessions. And if you haven't, they're posted on YouTube, so you can take a look at those. The links are posted in the three different groups, so you can find the links there. I'll post a final link to everything once we get this done. Just a recap of last week, we talked about part 2 rules. 10, you got the keep clear and right-of-way boats, so port keeps clear, starboard right-of-way. 11, windward stays clear or keeps clear of leeward. 12, clear astern, keeps clear of clear ahead. And 13, while tacking, you keep clear of everybody else. Pretty straightforward. We talked about part 2, section B, general limitations. 14, avoid contact, and we also indicated that you had to avoid causing someone to come into contact with another boat or another object they should avoid, like a mark, a race committee vessel, etc. That's new for this year. 15, initially give room to keep clear when you acquire right away. 16, keep clear boat room when changing course. Don't hunt the port boat. That's 16.2. 17, don't sail above your proper course. We'll talk more about that this week. Part 2, section D, other rules. 21, keep clear if returning to start, if you're taking a penalty or backing a sail. 22, keep clear if another boat is capsized, anchored aground, or rescuing someone. 23, don't interfere with a boat not racing, taking a penalty, or on another leg of the course, or returning to start. And maintain your proper course in those cases. If you don't maintain your proper course, then you could be guilty still of breaking 23. We also talked about Rule 31, don't touch a mark. 43, you can get exoneration in certain cases if you're the right-of-way boat or entitled to mark room. Rule 44, some of the penalties you can take. And in Appendix T and V are the alternative penalties that are sometimes used. Let's do a quick review of 17 on the definition of proper course. A course a boat would choose in order to sail the course as quickly as possible, in the absence of other boats referred to in the rule using the term. A boat has no proper course before her starting signal. The Rule 17, if a boat clear astern becomes overlapped within 2 of her hull lengths to leeward of a boat on the same tack, she shall not sail above her proper course while they remain on the same tack and overlapped within that distance, unless in doing so she promptly sails astern of the other boat. Just a reminder that no rule requires you to sail a proper course, just not to sail above the proper course. So that's just something that sometimes people forget. Would they remove the slam dunk exception? So now 17 does apply in this kind of situation where the blue boat tacks ahead and then to windward of the yellow boat, and the yellow boat cannot luff up and try to tack or luff the blue boat. So 17 does apply in this situation. Review, in this case, since blue is overtaking or getting the overlap from clear astern within 2 boat lengths, and on the same tack, then Rule 17 applies, and so therefore blue cannot luff yellow up. In this case, yellow is the one obtaining the overlap, so therefore Rule 17 is turned off because of the fact that it wasn't the leeward boat that got the overlap from clear astern. And then we looked at this situation where the blue boat is tacking into the leeward position. And so because they didn't obtain the overlap from clear astern, then 17 does not turn on. And then in this case, the reverse slam dunk situation, Rule 17 does turn on because of the fact that blue is tacking to windward. And so in this case, yellow is obtaining the overlap from clear astern. If you look at position 2 versus 3, and because yellow is obtaining the overlap from clear astern, 17 turns on. Now let's talk a little bit of some of the nuances of 17. So in this case, in the top situation, blue is overlapping yellow at position 2. Rule 17 turns on and blue shall not luff above her proper course. And we'll talk more about, again, what proper course is, but it has to do with current, sea state, wind direction, etc. In the bottom, blue overlaps yellow from within 2 boat lengths. Rule 17 is on. Blue shall not sail above her proper course at position 3 blue probably is breaking Rule 17 because she's luffing up past her proper course. However, as we will see in some of the future slides, that may not always be the case. Here we have a situation, yellow is trying to roll over blue, and so because of the fact that yellow is, the windward boat is getting the overlap from clear astern, blue is within its rights to luff up and try to keep yellow from rolling her too badly. Now let's look at this situation. Here, yellow is from clear astern, and so therefore 17 is not going to be on when at position 2 when yellow gets the overlap. And then let's look at what happens at position 4, because that 3 is the same as position 2. Rule 17 is not turned on at positions 2 or 3. However, when we look at position 4, now all of a sudden we see that yellow broke the overlap, and so blue is now clear astern of yellow. And so then when yellow bears back down to a reaching course at position 5, now the overlap was established with blue clear astern, therefore 17 does turn on, and therefore blue cannot luff yellow. On the same tack, proper course, remember we said that sometimes proper course can be different than what we think it is. So blue obtains an overlap at position 2, and so therefore 17 would be turned on, except a boat has no proper course before her starting signal. So now the gun goes off where the green line is here, and so they are side by side, and you would say yes, 17 is now turning on because the starting signal has sounded. However, the course that blue would sail in order to sail the course as quickly as possible would be to shoot the mark and try to get around the start mark. So therefore her luffing up in this case would be considered her proper course. So be aware that at a start, even after the starting signal, that luffing or shooting the mark may be its proper course, is probably its proper course. Here we have on the same tack proper course, the class flag is dropped at the gun and is designated by the green line here. At position 2, Rule 17 is not on before the start. Position 3, Rule 11 and 16.1, where blue is luffing yellow up as she would want to do. Position 4, she's luffed yellow enough to where her bow is over the start line, so she's OCS, or on course side. At 4.5, when the gun goes off, now blue must come back down to her proper course, which is going to be usually a close hauled course, and so therefore no rules were broken by blue because of the fact that she could luff until the starting signal. And then we talk about a lee bow situation. Is the leeward boat astern or clear astern of the blue boat? Well, no, because she's sailing over here and they're also on opposite tacks, but they're not clear astern. And then overlap to leeward, yes, at 3 and 4. Whole lengths apart, yes, on the same tack, but Rule 17 does not turn on when yellow comes in and does a lee bow type maneuver. So now let's talk about downwind. Rule 17, a leeward windward. When sailing by the lee or directly downwind, her leeward side is the side on which the mainsail lies, and the other side is her windward side. So these two boats are sailing downwind. Blue and yellow are both on starboard, and then yellow, being the leeward boat by the definitions, catches up to blue at position 2. 17 is now on, and so yellow maintains her course, does not change her course. Here at position 4, blue is probably breaking Rule 11 because of the fact that her main is most likely touching yellow. So in that case, blue is going to be breaking that rule. Another situation, just to clarify, Rule 12 is in effect here at position 1 because yellow is clear astern. 11, 15, and 17 are in play at position 2, and then 11 and 17 at position 3, and then rules 11, 14, and 17, because again, blue's mainsail has made contact. Who broke which rules? Well, blue is breaking 11 and 14. Yellow broke 14 because there was contact, but as we talked about last week, exoneration, she's not going to be guilty or disqualified because of 14 as long as there's no damage or injury. And yellow did not break 17, as we said before, because of the fact that yellow did not change course and did not sail past her proper course. Turning off Rule 17 downwind while they remain on the same tack. The cool thing is, just like we saw in the reaching situation, coming downwind, there are ways of turning 17 off to your advantage. So at position 1, you got Rule 12 again. At position 2, 11, 15, and 17, when the overlap gets established by the leeward boat. And then Rule 10, because at position 3, yellow jibes on the port, blue is on starboard, and now 4, she jibes back onto starboard, and so that turns off 17 because now the overlap on the same tack was established when the two boats were already side by side. So going downwind, that's how you turn off 17. Now yellow at position 5 can start to luff blue, keeping in mind that 16.1 requires yellow to allow blue to keep clear, give her room to keep clear. Same thing at 6, still Rule 11. She seems to be holding course at this point. Blue doesn't need to come up anymore. And then at 7, it's 11 and 16.1, but because yellow is bearing away from blue, obviously, her course change doesn't impact blue in terms of any issues with keeping clear. Now, the one thing to know about Rule 17 and proper course is that World Sailing Case 14 says, when owing a difference of opinion about a leeward boat's proper course, two boats on the same tack converge, the windward boat must keep clear. Two boats on the same leg sailing near one another may have different proper courses. So that you may not agree that they're sailing their proper course. However, you still have the obligation of keeping clear. You can always protest and then decide, have the jury decide whether or not they were actually sailing their proper course, or were they doing something they shouldn't have been doing. All right, so Rule 17, a proper course again. Here at position 1, Rule 12. 2, of course, is 11, 15, and 17 again, where the overlap occurs. At position 3, blue starts luffing up, and when they bluff up, yellow says, well, wait a minute, 17's on, and I don't think that you're sailing your proper course. Blue says, I am sailing my proper course. She continues to do the luffing rather than sailing directly to the mark. Well, look at the situation. Over here, we've got current that is going to push them to the left, closer to the mark. And so blue is saying, yeah, hey, I am going to go sailing further up than you think maybe I should, because I don't want to be set down into the mark here, because by the time they get somewhere between right around position 5, the current's still pushing them this direction, and they've got to get up above the mark and then start going around it. And so they've got to make sure they've got plenty of room to keep clear of the mark. So it's a situation where, because of the fact that blue gets mark room under 18.2A1, which we're going to talk more about in a few minutes, and she's still under 17 obligation or limitation, but she believes that because of the current, that her proper course is to sail higher than what yellow thinks. Here's another situation where there would be a disagreement about what the proper course is. Once again, we've got a situation where blue gets the overlap at position 2, 17 is turned on, blue sees some wind up here in this purple area, and so she starts luffing up to head towards that wind. And so remember, a proper course is the course a boat would choose in order to sail the course as quickly as possible in the absence of other boats referred to in the rule, using the term, and so on. At that point, blue has said, oh, there's wind over there, and whether yellow was there or not, I would have sailed higher so I could get into that wind, and I think I can sail faster if I do that. So she may even be helping yellow out by forcing her to go over there. So again, you got to be careful, and even if you're the windward keep clear boat and you think they're sailing above their proper course, if you have contact with blue, there's a good probability that you may be penalized for that contact under Rule 11 and 14. So if there's a proper course dispute between the boats, the windward boat must keep clear under Rule 11. 2, the leeward boat must give the windward boat room to keep clear under 16.1 as she changes course. The only recourse windward has in a Rule 17 dispute is to protest the leeward boat and take it to the room. There is no exoneration available to the windward boat for breaking a Rule 11 in a Rule 17 dispute. And if there is contact, then by definition, she wasn't keeping clear. Here's another situation where, there's a disagreement. Here, if you have the proper course dispute between the boats and there's contact, then most likely blue is going to be disqualified for breaking 11 unless it can be proven that the yellow boat's proper course was to sail higher like that. So you got to be careful. Some more on Rule 17. Here, yellow starboard is approaching a slower boat, black on port. So you can see the black boat here. Same scenario, overlap at position 2. Rule 17 is on. However, in the absence of blue, yellow would sail just like this to avoid black and pass her. And so position 12, 11, 15, 17, position 3 now is Rule 10 between yellow and black, and is Rule 11 between yellow and blue. Yellow is subject to 16.1 and 17 against blue, but again, this would be her proper course to avoid the slower going boat. Another situation here, the rival blue needs to beat green in this race, and so she's really desperate to try to do anything she can to slow green down. Remember the proper course, the boat would choose to sail the course as quickly as possible in the absence of other boats. So at position 1, blue is clear stern, position 2, blue gets the overlap, and then at 3 and 4, she starts luffing up and causing yellow to go up, which causes green to go up. And so, of course, yellow is protesting blue for sailing above her proper course. And so at this point, more than likely, the jury would find that blue has broken Rule 17 in the absence of any real reason for blue to sail that high, considering where they are. They're like about a boat length above the ley line. So it'd be hard for blue to justify this luffing action. Now we're going to start looking at marks and obstructions, section C, which is 18, 19, and 20. So here we have a mark rounding, green tet. I wonder if that's Lake Lanier, probably not, given Argentinian and Canadian boats and all. But here they are going around the mark, and I think I see a few rule violations going on here. Somebody didn't give somebody enough mark room, which we all know the pinwheel effect. This video is to show you a really bad mark rounding situation. Take a look at, you can't even see the mark, but it's actually right there. This little can, I guess, or buoy or whatever. And you see all the boats obviously are being pushed down. I don't know whether it's current or the wind or exactly what's going on. But you can see the cluster occurring in this area. The black boat is, of course, now having to avoid all of these boats because of the fact that they didn't set up far enough upwind of the mark in order to get around the mark with the current and everything that's going on. So those are just problems that we have at the mark. Jeff and a few others might appreciate the nice orderly rounding of the RC boats around the mark. Everybody's giving everybody plenty of mark room. Let's take a look at the Section C preamble. The Section C rules do not apply. Just kind of have it broken with these little dashes. Those aren't actually in the rule, but just to break it up. When the mark or obstruction referred to in those rules is a starting mark surrounded by navigable water or its anchor line, from the time the boats are approaching them to start until they have left it astern. So basically says 18, 19, and 20 are not applying at the start mark when they're getting ready to start. And we'll talk more about what that means later. Some truths about the mark room and room. The rules of Section C do not grant or take right-of-way from the right-of-way boats. Again, they're just limitations on the right-of-way boats, and it's all about safety. Section C rules determine when a boat is entitled to mark room or room to pass an obstruction. She may still be a keep clear boat, but she's entitled to mark room or room to pass that obstruction, whatever it happens to be. Here we have 18 and 19 things to talk about. Both rules, 18 and 19, are focused on the inside-outside boats. So obviously, yellow is going to be the inside boat relative to the RC. Blue is going to be the outside boat. And a reminder, Section C rules don't apply when they're at a starting mark getting ready to start, is the best way to think about it. Now look at the fact that we have a prep flag still up, so that means we have over a minute to go to the start, which is a general indication that they're not approaching the line yet to start. So boats are not approaching to start, therefore the signal vessel, the RC, is an obstruction and a mark. Rule 19 applies, and that means that blue has to give yellow room to go past the obstruction, which in this case is the race committee boat. Ad nauseum, this gets repeated about Section C rules not applying when they're approaching it to start. So here we can tell by the green line, that's going to be the starting signal at position 2.75 is what they're calling it here. And so yellow and blue are overlapped. Before the start, it doesn't matter whether Rule 17 is on or not because of the fact that yellow doesn't have a proper course before the starting signal. Once green occurs, then she does have a starting signal. But if you look at it, if yellow continued on her close-hauled course and you kind of projected a line that's parallel to her starboard side, and you compare that space that's left to the width of the boat, there isn't enough room for blue to go in between yellow and the race committee boat at this point. Though, because we talked about before, 14C says that yellow is not supposed to make blue run into the mark boat, and 16.1 also says, we're supposed to allow them to not hit the marks, and so the only proper thing she can do is bear off and protest blue. Blue's not entitled to room to pass the obstruction because of the fact that yellow has attempted to shut the door. The only thing I could say is that yellow probably needed to luff up a little sooner and try and close the door a little bit more, because this becomes, between two boats, always a sticking point of, was there enough room or wasn't there? And most times juries will find in favor of the leeward boat that there wasn't enough room, and that this blue boat will be disqualified for breaking Rule 11. Here we are coming at a finish line. So things are a little different. Again, Section C rules do not apply at a starting mark, but this isn't a starting mark, it's a finish line and therefore finish marks on either side. In this case, yellow properly is allowing blue room at the finish. That's what she's required to do. When we talk about Rule 18, we'll talk about that more. Here, green is going to be breaking Rule 18 because she did not give red the room she was entitled to come between green and the finish mark. Now, there's all kinds of stuff about sometimes if there's boats below and she's not able to give the room and that sort of thing. But in general, green should have given red mark room. So therefore, red shouldn't try to stick her nose in there and hit green or hit the pin. She should say protest, and then hopefully green does the right thing and does her turn or turns and then spins around and finishes. If red, for some reason or the other, just goes up to the left of the finish pin, she has not finished. She's got to turn around and come back and actually finish across the finish line, at least get her hull, part of her hull, across the finish line without hitting the finish pin. Now let's talk about mark room, because that gets us into Rule 18 and deeper. Now this was actually rewritten quite a bit, and part of it is because of sail the course and that sort of thing. But the room for a boat to sail to the mark when her proper course is to sail close to it, to round or pass the mark on the required side, and to leave it astern. And a lot of this, especially A, applies when we're talking about keep clear boats in particular, because if a keep clear boat doesn't have a proper course to sail close to a mark, then she's probably not going to be entitled to mark room. They removed this last part from this set of rules. If anybody knows mark room definition, they took this last part out, and so it is only this that exists in today's mark room definition. So when we're talking about the definition of mark room, the first part is room to sail to the mark when her proper course is to sail close to it. So now we have green, red, and blue. And proper course, again, a boat would choose to sail in the course as quickly as possible in the absence of other boats. So let's ask the question, what are the proper courses of the three boats? Well, green is going to sail as close to the pin as possible because that's probably the fastest way for her to finish. Red is the same way, going to sail straight downwind to the pin. Blue, on the other hand, is going to just sail straight down to somewhere, here in the middle of the finish line. So her proper course is not to sail close to one of the marks. Red and green are the only two that we're concerned about in terms of mark room. Which boat gets mark room? Well, green is getting mark room, and that's because, as we're going to hammer home the point, green is overlapped with red, even though red is on starboard, and so Rule 10 applies. Green, even though they're on port tack or port jibe, is overlapped by the definition of overlap. So green is supposed to get mark room at the finish mark. Mark room includes the room to carry out three maneuvers. 1, room to sail to the mark when her proper course is to sail close to it. 2, room to round or pass the mark on the required side. And 3, room to leave the mark astern. And we define room as the space the boat needs in the existing conditions, including space to comply with their obligations on the rules of Part 2 and Rule 31, while maneuvering promptly in a seaman-like way. So mark room visualized. Notice that these green lines are indicating in a, say, non-current, fairly low sea state situation that yellow should be sailing straight up to the mark and then rounding it in a seaman-like way. Now, as we talk about the corridor, we've got to consider the type and size of boats, the wind speed, the sea state or waves that are present, and how much current and what is that current doing? Is the current pushing them into the mark or pushing them away from the mark, etc. Does Rule 18 apply? Yes, both boats are required to leave the mark on the same side when one of them is in the zone and they're overlapped. So we notice down here that they're overlapped when yellow reaches the zone, so therefore yellow gets mark room, and a boat owed mark room is entitled to room, which means abiding by the rules of Part 2 and 31. Now, the other thing is yellow is the right-of-way boat. And because yellow is the right-of-way boat, that means, as my judge friend says, has superpower and could sail past the mark. So a lot of times people will say, oh, you need to round the mark now. You don't get to go sailing past the mark. Well, reality is yellow, as the right-of-way boat, does have the right to sail past the mark. And don't know why they would choose to do that, but that's what the power that the yellow boat has. So just be aware of that as well if you're the right-of-way inside boat. Rule 18, mark room, contains 4 sections. 18.1 describes when Rule 18 applies, and importantly, the 4 exceptions for when it does not apply, and for when Rule 18 gets turned off. 18.2 has a bunch of parts that describe giving mark room situations. 18.3 describes one boat tacking in the zone of a mark to be rounded to port. 18.4 describes when an inside right-of-way boat must jibe at a mark to sail her proper course. So while going upwind, the right-of-way boat could sail as far as they wanted. And then 18.4 describes when an inside right-of-way boat must jibe at a mark to sail her proper course. So we're going to go over each of these in detail to make sure everybody understands it. Here is all of Rule 18.1. Rule 18 applies when between boats when they are required to leave a mark on the same side and at least one of the boats is in the zone. However, it does not apply between boats on opposite tacks on a beat to windward, between boats on opposite tacks when the proper course at the mark for one, but not both of them is to tack, between a boat approaching a mark and one leaving it, and if the mark is a continuing obstruction, in which case Rule 19 applies. Rule 18 no longer applies when mark room has been given. So we're going to go over all that. And then the definition of zone, the area around the mark within a distance of 3 hull lengths of the boat nearer to it. So we here have this short little yellow boat, and their 3 boat length circle is pretty daggone small compared to the 3 boat length circle of the bigger blue boat. But because of the definition, area around the mark within the distance of 3 hull lengths of the boat nearer to it, so the yellow boat is nearer, and they define what that zone size is, and the blue boat's way back here and nowhere near the zone, as well as not overlapped with yellow. So 18 is going to be in favor of yellow having mark room. And a boat is in the zone when any part of her hull is in the zone. So remember that with the definition of zone, it's the hull, it's not any equipment in normal position, which is only applies really to overlap, I believe. When Rule 18 applies, when the boats are required to leave a mark on the same side and at least one of them is in the zone. So here blue is in the zone first and overlapped, and blue is going to be the inside boat. So as we'll look, when we look at 18.2, we'll find that blue gets mark room. So we want to look and see, first of all, does 18 apply? We got to look at the 4 exceptions. Are they on opposite tacks on a beat? No. Opposite tacks in proper course is for one to tack? No. Approaching and leaving? No. Continuing obstruction? No. So 18 applies. Now again, this is one that a lot of people get wrong, where blue and yellow are overlapped. Are they opposite tacks on a beat? No, they're opposite tacks downwind, which by definition, they're overlapped. So this number 1 doesn't apply. Number 2, opposite tacks in proper course for one is to tack, and that's not the case because, they both are going to get to the mark together. Approaching and leaving, no, they're both approaching. Continuing obstruction, no. So therefore, blue gets room, and if yellow doesn't give blue room, then yellow is breaking 18.2. So however, it does not apply when boats are on opposite tacks on the beat to windward. So here, obviously, the red boat is on port, the green is on starboard, and so 18 does not apply. 18.1A2, between boats on opposite tacks when the proper course at the mark for one, but not both of them, is to tack. So this rule, the first exception, does not apply. So position 1, Rule 12, back here where yellow is clear astern, blue is clear ahead. Rule 12 again, Rule 12, and 18.1A2, which we'll talk more about what that means later. There is no mark room because of 18.1A2. 18.1A2, between boats on opposite tacks when the proper course at the mark for one or both is not to tack. Here at position 4, obviously they're on opposite tacks and blue is going to have to tack here. So therefore 18.1A2 says that mark room is not applicable. And also between 3 and 4, blue is tacking. So therefore Rule 13 applies to blue, and she's got to keep clear. And then later we'll see that 18.3 can apply as well. At position 4, it's Rule 10 because blue is on port and yellow is on starboard. No mark room for blue per 18.1A2. However, it does not apply between a boat approaching a mark and one leaving it. So here green is leaving the mark, red is approaching it, and so therefore no mark room. And in 18.1A4, if the mark is a continuing obstruction, in which case Rule 19 applies. So here's a big rock out in the middle of the ocean. I think this is maybe Fastnet race. So that's obviously a continuing obstruction, and therefore 19 is going to apply. Here, Rule 18 no longer applies between boats when mark room has been given, and mark room has been given when the boat that was entitled to mark room, the yellow boat, is clear astern of the mark. So she has room to sail close to the mark, round the mark, and leave it astern. That's by the definition of mark room. But once she has left it astern, now 18.1b turns off off Rule 18. Right of way versus mark room, Rule 11, blue is right of way, Rule 11 and 18.2A1, blue right of way and mark room, same thing. At position 3, of course, 16.1, if 3 starts for some reason for luffing up and changing course, and position 4, Rule 11 still 16.1 if she for some reason was to luff up at this point, but she still has mark room and can make a tactical wide and tight rounding. So remember we talked about the fact that blue has superpower because they're not only the mark room entitled boat, but they're also right away as well, and so they can go out and then do the wide and then tight tactical rounding. So now we're coming downwind, position 1, Rule 11, yellow is right away, position 2, Rule 11 and 18.2A1, because when they reach the zone, yellow is first to the zone, but they're overlapped. Because of the fact that they're overlapped, the inside boat, which is blue, even though she's the keep clear boat, is entitled to mark room. Position 3, Rule 11 and 18.2A1, and yellow right away, blue mark room. So keep clear boats are entitled to a seaman-like rounding. Right-of-way boats are entitled to a tactical rounding. So pop quiz. In this situation, is there any mark room turned on? Required to leave the mark on the same side and at least one of them in the zone. Any exceptions apply? Of course, opposite tax on a beat applies, so therefore 18 is not on. Here we've got the two boats overlapped when they reach the zone. Are there any of the exceptions applying? And of course the answer is no, so therefore 18 is on. Required to leave the mark. Are there any exceptions that apply in this situation? No, they're both on the same tack, and so therefore, red is going to be the right-of-way boat as well as entitled to mark room at the finish. Notice this is a blue flag. Another finishing situation. Any exceptions apply? No. Again, even though red is on port and green is on starboard, because of the fact that they're going downwind, by definition, they're overlapped. So Rule 18 is turned on and red gets mark room. And just as to point out, we get these situations all the time, especially with the ASIMs versus the non-ASIM sails, where the angles between red and green may be as much as close to 75, 80 degrees. We've seen those kinds of situations where green doesn't even know that red is racing in from way over here somewhere, and especially if it's a ASIM fast sport boat zipping in here, next thing she knows, green is going, whoa, where in the world did you come from? But that's just the reality, is that green's got to pay attention to any of the boats coming in downwind over here because she's got to give them room. Do they get mark room? Are there any exceptions that are applying? Now, it is a gate mark, and there are some things that apply here later that we'll talk about, but there are no exceptions, so therefore mark room is on between red and green. So now we'll get into 18.2 and giving mark room. So when the first of two boats reaches the zone, if the boats are overlapped, the outside boat at that moment shall give the inside boat mark room. If the boats are not overlapped, the boat that has not reached the zone at that moment shall give the other boat mark room. And then finally, when a boat is required to give mark room by this rule, she shall continue to do so for as long as the rule applies, even if the overlap is broken and a new overlap begins. Now, the key difference, or 18.2A2, is they changed the definition. It used to be talking about clear astern and clear ahead, and whichever one got to the zone first and all that kind of stuff. It caused some issues which had to be resolved by cases. And so what they decided to do is essentially codify what the cases had come up with. And so if the boats are not overlapped, one is clear astern, one is clear ahead, the boat that has not reached the zone at that moment shall give the other boat mark room. And we'll look at some examples of that to make that a little clearer. And then B, Rule 18.2A no longer applies if the boat entitled to mark room passes head to wind or leaves the zone. One of the things they did when they rearranged Rule 18 is they tried to make it as logical as possible so that when one rule got turned off, generally that was the last time you saw that rule, and then you went to the next rule. Because before, you were jumping back and forth between the 18.2 rules, and it got really super confusing. Once you get used to the new order, you'll begin to see that it applies fairly well. 18.2a no longer applies, so if we go back to 18a, if one of these two situations occurred, either they were overlapped or they were not overlapped, and the boat entitled to mark room passes head to wind, i.e. tacks, or leaves the zone, then rule 18.2a mark room doesn't work anymore. 18.2c, when 18.2a does not apply and the boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room. We'll show you some examples. When we look at D, if a boat obtained an inside overlap from clear astern or by tacking to windward of the other boat, and from the time the overlap began, the outside boat has been unable to give mark room, then 18.2a and 18.2c do not apply between them. Again, it's easier to see the examples. And then E is the same as before. If there's reasonable doubt that a boat obtained or broke an overlap in time, it shall be presumed that she did not. There's an argument about whether a boat obtained an overlap, then we'll presume she didn't. The argument about whether she broke an overlap in time, then we presume that she didn't. This is an obvious situation when the first of two boats reach the zone. If the boats are overlapped, the outside boat at the moment shall give the inside boat mark room. Position 1, there's overlap between yellow and blue. Yellow is right away, but must give blue mark room. Position 2 and 3 is obviously rules 11, but also blue is entitled to mark room under 18.2a1 because of the fact they were overlapped when the first of the two boats reach the zone. 18.2c, when 18.2a does not apply, so they approach the zone on opposite tacks. Yellow was on starboard, blue was on port, and then yellow tacks over to port outside of blue. And so this is where 18.2c applies. When we're marked to be left to port, starboard yellow is below the ley line. Position 1 is rule 10. Position 2, rule 10. Yellow enters the zone, but rule 18 does not apply yet. Now at position 2.5, yellow passes head to wind to a close hauled course, rule 13, so she's got to keep clear. At position 3, yellow now on a close hauled course, rule 12, so yellow is clear ahead, and blue obtains an inside overlap on yellow. Blue gets mark room by 18.2c. Here yellow, if she tacks, and then if she starts coming up, but blue gets that overlap by 18.2c, she's going to owe blue mark room. And so both boats are tacking at this point, so therefore mark room is turned off. And then blue is now right away rule 11 and entitled to mark room under 18.2c again at position 6. So it's really just a race to the zone many times, as we'll find out when we start talking about not overlap. 18.2a2, if the boats are not overlapped, the boat that has not reached the zone at that moment shall give the other boat mark room. So here yellow reaches the zone first, clear ahead of blue, which to blue's chagrin, because position 1 is rule 12 and 18.2a2, so yellow has right away and mark room at position 1. Position 2, blue, of course, must have been just going a whole lot faster, gets overlapped inside, and so now yellow's still a right-away boat, blue is the windward boat, but blue doesn't have mark room. And so when blue overlaps yellow, yellow is right away and gets mark room. At position 3, yellow right away gets mark room but does not take it. Blue may take it at her peril if yellow's nice and kind and lets blue have the mark room because she doesn't want to create a fuss. However, because mark room is the fact that, you're sailing close to the mark, she could take what's rightfully hers and protest blue for breaking 11 and 18.2a2. So you got to be careful.
So yellow couldn't just luff blue out of there?
She could, yeah, because the overlap was established by the windward boats. The 17's not on.
Right.
And so yellow could luff blue, and that's what she probably should do, and take the mark room that she's entitled to. So, Jeff, you would never do that. You would never just give up all that extra room, would you?
Oh, absolutely not.
So blue is in a tough spot and should be protested at the very least by yellow. Back to 18.2A1, if the boats are overlapped, the outside boat at that moment shall give the inside boat mark room. And again, just to point out that the overlap angles are so huge when you're sailing downwind. So even though Rule 10 is in play, 18.2A1 gives blue a mark room at a port rounding. And so she's right away and mark room. Position 2, Rules 10 at mark room again. Position 3. See, now blue jibes, and when she jibes, now Rule 11 makes yellow the right-of-way boat, but she still gets the mark room to go around the mark. Notice that there's no Rule 15 for yellow because yellow acquired the right-of-way because of what blue did when she went around there. Now, 18.4, we'll talk about more, but 18.4 says the right-of-way boat, which in this case, up until this point of the jibe for blue, is she cannot sail any farther away from the mark than is required for her to round the mark. We'll talk more about that later. Another not overlap situation, position 1, 10 and 18.2A2. So even though green is the right-of-way boat, because she's not overlapped with red, at this point, red, even though she's the keep clear boat, gets mark room. And so green has to do the right thing, which is to go outside of red and let red have the mark room that she's entitled to. And if for some reason green was to protest red, red would be exonerated for breaking Rule 10 because she's sailing into the mark room that she's entitled to. So another overlap situation, Rule 10 and 18.2A1, red keep clear, gets mark room, green right away, but must give red mark room. Rule 10 and 18.2A1, red keep clear, sailing outside of the mark room. Because remember we said that mark room is the room to sail close to the mark, and therefore she is not exonerated for breaking Rule 10 since she's not sailing in the mark room that she's entitled to. At the end of 18.2A, there's this last phrase, when a boat is required to give mark room by this rule, she shall continue to do so for as long as the rule applies, even if an overlap is broken and a new overlap begins. So at position 1 back here, there's no overlap. Rule 12, 18.2A2, blue gets mark room and is also the right-of-way boat since they're on the same tack. When they become overlapped here at position 2 and then position 3, yellow still said, hey, well, if you're going to give me the room, I'm going to try to take it. And blue, rightfully so, is going to protest yellow for taking the mark room that she was not entitled to. So you got to be careful when you get there, because even though this overlap gets established, they're already in the zone, and 18.2A says that even if a new overlap begins in the zone, it doesn't count. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change the fact that blue was entitled to mark room. So be careful again when you have two boats going way different speeds, and if blue gets into the zone ahead of yellow and then yellow catches up and she tries to go in and take the mark room, blue can protest her. 18.2A no longer applies if the boat entitled to mark room passes head to wind. So you can see, there we go. So notice how yellow was entitled to mark room. As soon as she tacks, 18.2A is turned off by 18.2B. So at position 2, 11, 15, 17, 18.2A2, blue right away must give yellow mark room. And then between 3 and 4 is when yellow, the boat entitled to mark room, passes head to wind and turns off 18.2A. You have to be a little careful and not say things like, oh, 18's turned off. Yeah, sort of, kind of, but you got to be more specific and say 18.2A is turned off, because there's other rules that could apply and will apply later on. Here's a crazy scenario a buddy of mine and I were playing with just for fun. So position 1 is going to be 18.1A, no mark room, opposite tacks on a beat. So it's actually 18.1A1. Then position 2, now that red is on the same tack, now 18.2C applies. And so even though it's kind of a moot issue, you could say that red has mark room because she would be considered the inside boat in relationship to how they have to go around the mark. Position 3, again, same thing, basically with rule 11, red is right away and technically has mark room, but doesn't really matter. At position 3.5, they're both tacking, and when they're both tacking, the boat on the port side by rule 13 is the keep clear boat at that point. Green is the right-of-way boat as both boats pass head to wind. So now we get to position 4. It's here red gets an overlap with green from clear astern, and so by 18.2C she gets mark room, and so they can go around the mark. Now if for some reason green couldn't give red the mark room, then by 18.2D she doesn't have to. And then they go around the mark, they tack, which position 5 is, they're still on mark room. Position 6, they've now both tacked. That turns off 18.2 because of 18.3, the boat tacking in the zone. And so now there's no mark room to worry about, and red is right away. And so look at this where yellow gets an inside overlap with blue at position 2, but notice that all the other boats are sailing down towards the mark, and in order for blue to try to get green and white to give her enough room to give yellow room is almost impossible, or is impossible, unless yellow starts yelling for room right here as she hits the zone at, say, position 2.6 or whatever you want to call it. Even then, depending on how fast they're going, it's going to be real difficult for blue to give her the mark room if she can't convince green and white to go up. So by 18.2D, she doesn't have to give them mark room. So 18.2E, again, if it's reasonable doubt that a boat obtained or broken overlap in time, it shall be presumed that she did not. Position 1, rule 11, here at position 2, blue luffs hard up to break the overlap just as they enter the zone. And of course, the dispute is going to be whether or not they broke the overlap and was blue in the zone before yellow got overlapped again. And if there is a reasonable doubt, then it'll presume that she did not break the overlap. And vice versa, if yellow thinks that she got the overlap before they hit the zone, but there's a reasonable doubt to presume that she did not get the overlap. It can work both ways. It's a judgment call. Okay, another quick pop quiz. Does anybody get mark room? Obviously, there's no overlap at position 1, but that doesn't matter because they're not at the zone. At position 2, there is an overlap with the equipment. Yellow is going to get that mark room because of the fact that she's the inside boat. Just remember, overlap is hull and equipment in normal position. Mark room. So red is overlapped inside green at the zone and gets mark room. At position 3, green breaks 18.2A1 and therefore will be DSQ'd unless she does her penalty turns. Here, who gets mark room? At position 3, red breaks rule 10, but is exonerated for breaking rule 10 by rule 43(1)B, as she was sailing within the mark room to which she was entitled. Therefore, green breaks 18.2A2. Again, if you draw the line here at the back of red, they're not overlapped. Red is the first to the zone. Therefore, red gets the mark room. And some of these other examples we saw earlier, that's what the boat should have done, which is to sail as close to the mark as possible, taking the mark room she was entitled to. Then the green boat is going to have to circle around and round the mark later. 18.3, tacking in the zone. If a boat passes head to wind from port to starboard tack in the zone of a mark to be left to port, Rule 18.2 does not apply between her and another boat on starboard tack that is fetching the mark. If the other boat has been on starboard tack since entering the zone, the boat that passed head to wind shall not cause the other boat to sail above close haul to avoid contact, and shall give mark room if the other boat becomes overlapped. So now the thing to understand here is that things changed a little bit. It used to be that if a boat passes head to wind from port to starboard tack in the zone and was fetching a mark to be left to port, Rule 18.2 doesn't apply between her and another boat on starboard tack that is fetching the mark. Now, if any time a boat passes head to wind from port to starboard tack in the zone and the other boat was fetching the mark, whether or not that boat was fetching the mark from the get-go doesn't matter. 18.2 is turned off. We'll show you some examples to try to explain what we're talking about. So here's a classic example where the red boat causes the green boat to luff up past head to wind, and the red boat is obviously tacking in the zone. But the reality is that red actually is breaking Rule 10, not Rule 18.3, because at position 3, she had not even tacked at position 3. It's not until between position 3 and 4 that she actually tacks. So therefore, the rule that red is breaking at this point is Rule 10. So position 4, of course, now they're at Rule 11 and 15. But at this point at position 3, green should have protested red for breaking Rule 10. That's not an example of 18.3. So tacking in the zone, here red tacks and causes green to luff up above close hauled. You can see that starting at position 3. That's the one I was trying to get. All right, so right there at position 3 is where green had to luff up from close hauled, so therefore red is now breaking Rule 18.3. Here's another example. And at the very last moment, you can see where green has to luff up above close hauled in order to avoid red. Therefore, red again is breaking 18.3. Here, red comes in on port, green is on starboard, but green is way above the ley line. And red, while not entitled to mark room, she can come in here, but recognize that at position 4, where she tacks in the zone, that there is no mark room, 18.2 is turned off, and she just needs to make sure that she doesn't cause green to go above close haul. So just be aware of that. All right, so here's what red should be doing. Red should be going behind green. That's the safe way to tack in the zone when you're the port boat and you're got a starboard boat. So this one is kind of similar to the other animation that we saw. Here at position 2, Rule 13 applies because red hasn't gotten to a close hauled course, and 18.3 because she is passing head to wind in the zone. Therefore, 18.2 does not apply, no mark room for red. Position 11 and 18.3, red is right away Rule 11, but she's restricted by Rule 18.3 to not cause green to go above close hauled. 18.4, jibing in the zone. When an inside overlap right-of-way boat must jibe at a mark to sail her proper course. Until she jibes, she shall sail no farther than from the mark than needed to sail that course. Rule 18.4 does not apply at a gate mark. So a lot of times people forget about the fact that 18.4 does not apply at a gate mark. But here we have a mark to be left to port. Green is the right-of-way boat. Position 1, green inside overlap mark room. Green is also right-of-way. Position 2, same as position 1. Position 3 to 4, green is sailing her proper course to jibe and round the mark. So remember we said that green as the right-of-way boat and also has mark room in this case, and she can sail a wide and then tight tactical course, but she can go no farther than the course necessary to sail close to the mark when she finishes up after her jibe. Position 5, has mark room been given, assuming the next mark is to windward? One would say not quite yet. And red's got to be careful here because she's so close to green. Green is on a close hauled course and red is the right-of-way boat, but she's got to make sure that she gives green the mark room she's still entitled to, and that doesn't occur until green stern is right here, even with the mark. Be careful when you're finishing up on those jibes. Another example, green sails beyond her proper course and breaks 18.4. So in the previous example, green jibed about this point and rounded the mark. Here though, green just keeps going. And when you're sailing downwind, the right-of-way boat is not allowed to do that. And green has now broken 18.4 and red should be protesting green for that offense. Green is right away and gets mark room, same as position 1. Position 3, green right away is not limited by 18.4 because notice this other mark over here, this is a gate. Now the reason for that is that, let's think about it this way. Green may decide, for whatever reason, instead of rounding this mark of the gate, she may want to go all the way over to this gate mark and round it instead. 18.4 not applying at the gate allows the right-of-way boat, green, to keep going towards this mark. And so red at this point is kind of in trouble if green had decided that she wanted to keep going here, and then red would have broken rule 10 in this position. Just be careful whenever you're coming to a gate mark downwind. So finally, we're going to get the room to pass an obstruction 19. It's a lot easier to apply, at least I think, than 19. Okay, 19.1, when Rule 19 applies between two boats at an obstruction, except when Rule 18 applies and the obstruction is a mark or the obstruction is another boat overlapped with each of them. However, at a continuing obstruction, Rule 19 always applies and Rule 18 does not. So what's an obstruction? An object that a boat could not pass without changing course substantially if she were sailing directly towards it, and one of her hull lengths from it, an object that can be safely passed on only one side, or an object, area, or line that is so designated in a rule. I won't go into all the details, but World Sailing changed this rule and the definition and then realized they made a mistake. So they changed it essentially almost back to what it was originally. But what it now allows is for the SI or NOR to designate, say, a closed finishing line and say the start-finish line is a obstruction unless you're actually finishing or starting, or an area or an object. However, a boat racing is not an obstruction to other boats unless they're required to keep clear of her. Think about two port boats coming up on a starboard boat. The starboard boat is an obstruction, or if Rule 22 applies, avoid her. However, at a continuing obstruction, Rule 19 always applies and Rule 18 does not. Reminder of what a continuing obstruction is. This is a brand new definition. An obstruction is a continuing obstruction when the boat with the shortest hull referred to in the rule using the term will pass alongside it for at least 3 of her hull lengths. You know, if you got a 30-foot boat, then it's an obstruction that's at least 90 feet long. However, the following are not a continuing obstruction: a vessel underway, a boat racing, or a race committee vessel that is also a mark. So these 3 things, a vessel underway, think about in Charleston Harbor, and a big container ship going in or out, is not a continuing obstruction. It is an obstruction, just not a continuing one. A boat racing is never a continuing, and that was already in the rule. And then a race committee vessel is also never a continuing obstruction, no matter how big it is. So again, we got our fast net continuing obstruction. However, at a continuing obstruction, Rule 19 always applies and Rule 18 doesn't. This is a starting line or a finishing line that is at the end of a dock, and you can't sail through the dock. There's no navigable water there. So therefore, Rule 19 is going to apply in this situation. And the blue boat is obviously going to be asking for room to get past that continuing obstruction. So giving room, a right-of-way boat may choose to pass an obstruction on her port or starboard side. So they decided to get a little more explicit on this one in terms of when it says the required side, they were talking about, okay, her port or starboard side instead. And then if a right-of-way boat changes course when choosing on which side to pass the obstruction, she shall give the other boat room to keep clear. So whatever side of the obstruction that the right-of-way boat chooses, she has to make room for the keep clear boat as well. When the boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat room between her and the obstruction, unless she's been unable to do so from the time the overlap began, which most of the time is not going to apply. And then C, while the boats are passing a continuing obstruction, If a boat that was clear astern and required to keep clear becomes overlap between the other boat and the obstruction, and at the moment the overlap begins, there is not room for her to pass between them. 1, she's not entitled to room under 19.2b, and 2, while the boats remain overlapped, she shall keep clear and rules 10 and 11 do not apply. Let's take a look at some examples. 19.2a, a right-of-way boat may choose to pass an obstruction on her port or starboard side. So here she's passing the race committee, prep flag's still up, so they're 3 minutes to the start. So they're not approaching the line to start, so therefore Part C applies. Race committee is an obstruction. If green is going to go below the race committee boat, she's got to give blue room in order to pass that obstruction. Another 19.2a, now we got 20 seconds to start. So these boats are probably heading towards the start line, so they're going to the line to start. They're not near a mark. That part does not apply, turning off Part C. However, blue is going to be the clear ahead boat, and therefore by Rule 12 an obstruction to green and red, and so Rule 19 does apply in this situation, and green right away gets to choose how to pass the obstruction blue. And so if green goes above blue, she's got to give red room to keep clear and go above blue. If she chooses to go behind blue for some reason, she's got to give red room to go past as well. 10 seconds to start, same situation as before. Green chose to go below. She's got to give red room to pass blue. She cannot use blue as a pick to try to scrape her off. 19.2b, when boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat room between her and the obstruction unless she's been unable to. Here we've got an anchored photo boat, so therefore obstruction not continuing because it's not bigger than 3 hull lengths, but nonetheless blue needs room from yellow, calls for room, and yellow gives her the room as she should. Now we have a shoreline situation. Blue's going to be in trouble here. While the boats are passing a continuing obstruction, if a boat that was clear astern and required to keep clear becomes overlap between the other boat and the obstruction, at the moment the overlap begins, there is not room for her to pass between them. She's not entitled to room, and while the boats remain overlapped, she shall keep clear, and rules 10 and 11 do not apply. If blue gets an overlap, which does it too, she's the right-of-way boat. However, if you look at the fact that as yellow was coming along here on her course, she was not going to be able to give blue room at this point, and so by 19.2c, she is not required to give blue that room, and blue has to keep clear of yellow despite the fact that blue is the right-of-way boat. So then yellow does her best to give blue some room even though she's not required to. And so because at the moment the overlap was established somewhere back here, there wasn't enough room for her, but nonetheless she tried to stick her nose in there. Yellow did the right thing, luffed up and protested blue for breaking that rule. So now let's get 20. Hailing. This is a brand new thing. Before you could say almost anything you wanted to. There was no required hail. But now if a boat wants room to tack and an obstruction, she must say room to tack. However, she shall not hail unless she's approaching an obstruction and will soon need to make a substantial course change to avoid it safely. And remember, you got to be sailing at close hauled or above. So that's an important thing that people often forget. They think, oh, I'm reaching in and I can ask for room. But if you're not sailing close hauled by the way the rules are written, you cannot call for room. In addition, she shall not hail if the obstruction is a mark, and a boat that is fetching it would be required to change course as a result of the hail. So yellow is approaching an obstruction green and is close hauled. She may hail for room to tack per rule 20.1. At position 2, they're both tacking. Rule 13, blue is going to be the keep clear boat because she's the port boat in a simultaneous tack situation. Position 3, they're close hauled. Blue is right away over yellow, and she gave yellow initially the room she required. And the question is rule 17 turned on? The answer is no, because of the fact that they were overlapped and they simultaneously tacked, so neither boat was clear astern. Since blue wasn't clear astern, 17 is not on. Rule 11 is on at positions 4 and 5. So responding, if somebody says room to tack, after a boat hails, she shall give a hailed boat time to respond. So you got to give them a few seconds to decide what they want you to do. A hailed boat shall respond even if the hail breaks 20.1. The hailed boat should also protest the hailing boat, but nonetheless, even if the hail breaks 20.1, the boat's not close hauled or some other thing in that rule, a hailed boat shall respond either by tacking as soon as possible, so that's one response, or by immediately replying "you tack" and then giving the hailing boat room to tack and avoid her. So if you do say "you tack," you got to make sure that you give that boat room to tack. When a hail boat responds, the hailing boat shall tack as soon as possible. If she doesn't, she breaks Rule 20.2d. From the time a boat hails until she has tacked and avoided a hailed boat, Rule 18.2 does not apply between them. So the three required hails now in the racing rules are the word protest, room to tack is the new hail, and then "you tack" is the third required hail in the rules. So a hailed boat shall respond even if the boat breaks Rule 20.1. So in this case, yellow starts asking for room to tack at position 1, and she's approaching an obstruction and will soon need to make a substantial course change and is sailing close hauled. Well, here she's not sailing close hauled, she's reaching. So she would have to at least come up to close hauled before, by Rule 20, that she would be eligible to call for room to tack. But blue, nonetheless, has to respond to the request for room to tack, even if it breaks 20.1. After she tacks and gets things settled down, she protests yellow. So she probably should be protesting sooner than up here at position 3, because the incident is back here when she asked for room to tack but was not on a close hauled course. See, a hailed boat shall respond either by tacking as soon as possible or by immediately replying "you tack" and then giving the hailing boat room to tack and avoid her. Here, yellow calls for room to tack. Blue doesn't tack until here at this position 3. Well, that breaks 20.2c because she did not tack as soon as possible. Obviously, she could have tacked somewhere back here, and that would have given yellow the room that she needed to tack and pass between blue and green. So be careful about it when somebody asks for room to tack, or if you decide to tell them to tack, you tack, got to let them tack and avoid them, or if you don't, then you've got to go ahead and tack as quickly as possible. Blue cannot use green as a pick. Or by immediately replying "you tack" and giving room to the hailing boat to tack. So blue says, okay, "you tack," because I want to keep going this way. And so blue slows down and allows yellow to tack clear ahead and continue on the course up here on starboard. Meanwhile, blue says, "Yeah, okay, see you later. I see better wind over here to the right," and continues on. And that's a legitimate way to approach that. When a hailed boat responds, the hailing boat shall tack as soon as possible. So at this point, yellow calls for room to tack on blue, and blue says, okay, fine, and starts tacking immediately like she's supposed to. Yellow says, never mind, I'm going to keep going this way. I think I see better wind. Well, now yellow has broken 20.2d because she hailed for room to tack. Blue responded appropriately, but yellow did not tack like she was supposed to. E, from the time a boat hails until she has tacked and avoided a hailed boat, 18.2 does not apply between them. Here, red is coming up to the obstruction, which is green on starboard, and so red is going to need room to tack. She calls for room to tack. And so even though mark room was on back here at position 1 and position 2, as soon as she calls for room to tack, now yellow has to respond, and 18.2 mark room is turned off. And red does tack as soon as she can, but she's also got to avoid the mark. She tacks on the correct side of the mark where she wanted to be, and she was also able to avoid running into green. Yellow's kind of pissed about it, but reality is mark room is now turned off as soon as red has requested room to tack. Might be a maneuver you might want to consider, but your friends won't like you much if you try that. 20.3, passing on a hail to an additional boat. When a boat has been hailed for room to tack and she intends to respond by tacking, she may hail another boat on the same tack for room to tack and avoid her. She may hail even if her hail does not meet the conditions of 20.1. 20.2 applies between her and a boat she hails. And 20.4, additional requirements for hails when conditions are such that a hail may not be heard. The boat shall also make a signal that clearly indicates her need for room to tack or her response. The notice of race may specify an alternative communication for a boat to indicate her need for room to tack or her response and require boats to use it. Got a really super windy day, using some sort of arm signal to indicate that you need room to tack is an appropriate thing to do. That's it for the in-depth dive of 17, 18, and 19, and 20. That was a lot. Week 4, we're going to get into part 3, conduct of a race, part 5, protest and redress, request and Appendix A scoring. Talk about what the event organizing authority should be doing, what should the race committee be doing, prepare the SI, conduct the race, score the race, how to properly protest another boat, and when and how to request redress. Then week 5, we'll get into part 4, other requirements while racing. It's the part of the rule book a lot of sailors never look at until they get caught by it. So I just want to make sure you're aware of some things there. And then we'll talk about part 7, event organization. So if you're writing NORs and SIs and things like that, there's definitely some stuff there that you need to be aware of. And then week 6, we'll start getting into any kind of scenarios that people want to submit and have analyzed that we haven't already talked about, or if you just want to go back and talk over some of the slides that we've already gone over, if you have questions or whatever. And then I'll talk about how do you become a race officer and or a judge, and what are the requirements to do that. Credits, again, Jerry Thompson is great, and he made a lot of these slides. Some of the TV slides are from some of the TV stations. Your comments are always welcome. Jerry's email and my email, if you have any comments, corrections. I know there are a couple of rule references I saw that need to be corrected, and I'll get that done